Amen. Okay, just kind of by way of review, we made it over to chapter 7. And just quickly, what happened to Job first? What did he lose first? He lost his physical possessions, right? Then he lost his children. Then what happened? Huh? He lost his health. What exactly happened to him to cause him to lose his health? Exactly what kind of affliction did he have? Boils. Now that's, we look at that and I don't know that we necessarily understand exactly at first glance how bad that is. That was a terrible affliction. So sore to the touch that you can't stand it. You can't find an easy place to rest. It's infectious. It runs with pus. Worms are in it, or in the boils. They have a terrible odor. It's disfiguring. His skin turns a dark color. Couldn't even recognize who he was. It caused him to have a terrible breath. He couldn't eat. He couldn't even move his jaws to chew. Everything about it was miserable. He couldn't sleep. And when he did happen to go off into sleep, he had terrible nightmares. So he had no rest or relaxation. Everything about it was miserable. Satan, Angie asked a good question about the whole scenario in the beginning of Job, how the sons of God, and by the way, what were the sons of God? Angels in the context of Job. In the context of Genesis chapter 6, men, right? Followers of God, faithful followers of God. The sons of God, angels, presented themselves in this context on a regular basis before God. Satan had to appear. God questioned him, "What have you been doing?" So what was his response?
Walking around on earth.
Going to and fro. What was he looking for? Now, we're not told in Job, but if we put all of the information together and we listen to what Peter had to say in 1 Peter 5:8, he was looking for a soul to destroy. So, this was right in his wheelhouse, wasn't it? And so, when God mentioned Job, what was Satan's response to that? He only likes you. He only worships you. He's only favorable toward you because you're favorable toward him. You have built this hedge around him. You've made him wealthy. You have honored him. And if you take all of that away, what will he do? Curse you right to your face. God says, okay, take it away, except don't do what? Well, at first, don't touch him physically. Take everything else. Take his possessions. You can even take his children. Okay, that happened. What did it say at the end? In all of this, Job didn't do what? He did not sin. So it all comes back. It happens again. Basically, chapter 2 was a repeat of that same scenario. The angels presented themselves to God. Satan shows up again. What have you been doing? I've been walking to and fro. The same conversation is had. He said, yeah, but if you touch Job physically, he'll curse you to your face. And then we have this sickness, this affliction. And so up to this point, we are at a place where Job has 3 friends who have come to visit him and to sit with him and to comfort him. How much comforting has been going on? Well, not a lot of comforting has been going on because they showed up and they said, well, Job, what's the problem? What did they say the issue was? You're living in sin. It's not so much that you committed a sin here and there. You're living in sin. You are a sinner. And there's a big difference between living in sin and sinning on occasion, right? And so their insinuation is, Job, you're living in sin. In fact, you are a hypocrite. You are a hypocrite. And they are going to pound that and stay on that topic until the bitter end. And in fact, not only have they stated that Job is a hypocrite, they turn on his children when a guy's down and he's lost his children. Well, the worst thing you can do is tell someone who's a faithful follower of God their children are lost and in hell. They're going to be in hell, in torments, right? At this very moment. Well, Job, your children died lost, and they deserve to be lost. Well, could it be worse? Could that be worse news for a parent? Well, no, that's the worst thing you could tell a parent. And so we see the character of Job, and we learn just what a upstanding, godly man he is, that he would even consider going to God on behalf of these men when all is said and done. Any comments, questions before we move on?
How about his condition with all these boils and stuff? I remember they from the soles of his feet to the crown of his head, they were all over. He didn't have a spot.
He didn't have a spot that wasn't afflicted.
My mind looks at him and I see, we probably all seen pictures of the Holocaust whenever the concentration camp were eliminated.
Yep.
And some of those people that were absolutely just breathing skeletons is all they were. Covered them up with boils, and that's what Job was like.
Well, I'm sure that, we probably, in my mind, when I consider Job, to me, only one other person probably who's ever lived that suffered worse than Job was the Lord. I can't think of anyone who suffered more than Job physically in this world. Okay, chapter 7. Begin with verse 1. The shortness of man's days. Each person is given a period of time on earth. First couple of verses here. And that time is filled with labor, hardship, and what does it ultimately end in? Death. We're going to die. That's just the bottom line, isn't it? The writer of Hebrews described it this way, Hebrews 9:27, and as it is appointed unto men once to die, but after this the judgment. So the point Job is making for introducing this point is to vindicate himself in wishing to die. He's trying to say there's nothing wrong with me wanting to die because ultimately what happens to us anyway? We're all going to die. We all have trouble and hardship in this life. Now look what's happening to me. All I want is some relief. Job's not saying I'm going to go out and kill myself. I'm not going to murder myself. I just want relief. I want God to go ahead and stop restraining himself because he thinks God is doing this. I want God to stop restraining himself and just let me die. He's asking, really in his mind, what's he asking for? Mercy. Right? He just wants some mercy. Just let me go on. And so he has maintained it was natural. It was as natural for man in these circumstances to wish to be released by death as for a soldier to desire for his term of obligation to be up. You know, a soldier enlists in the military. What is he always looking forward to? His time to be up, to get to come home, right? He wants for the war to end or for his time to be over, right? You know that as well as anybody, right? You're always looking for that time to get to come home. Even a career man, right? My dad was a career man. He was always looking forward to that time when he could come home, right? And so Job uses that as an illustration. He described his discomfort as unending. At night he tossed and he turned and he waited on the morning. But when the night is over, he said that his suffering is just as severe. In the morning thou shalt say, would God it were even. At even thou shalt say, would God it were morning. For the fear of thine heart, wherewith thou shalt fear. And for the sight of thine eyes, which thou shalt see. Deuteronomy 27:67. You know, I can't wait till it's morning. Maybe I'll have some ease. When the morning comes, I can't wait till it's night so I can go to bed, maybe get some rest. Well, it's a never-ending story. You're not going to get it either way. And so that's the way that Job felt. He speaks in verses 6 through 10 of the swiftness of his days. His life, he says, is like a weaver's shuttle. A weaver's shuttle was that instrument which the weaver inserted the filling in the woof or the weft. Have you ever seen a shuttle? You know, it's a piece of wood about so long, and it's kind of pointed on the end. And in the middle, it's kind of hollowed out, and it looks like it has a bobbin in it. And they would send that through back and forth. And if you ever watched anybody that really knows what they're doing, it's just back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So when you see that, and and for the most part, modern people, and I had to look this up years ago so I would understand, well, what's he talking about? I'd never seen this. But when we look at it, and then we say, oh, I get it. Now we see that is fast. So now he's saying, boy, your days are just here and gone, right? He goes on to say life is like a wind or a breath. You know, you sit down and you're like, phew. Well, that's quick, ain't it? It's here, it's gone. You know, you put a teapot on. Is that how James described it? You put a teapot on. You remember the old teapots and they would whistle? You see that steam, that puff of steam, and it's just here and it's just gone, right? Or the old percolator coffee pot. My granny had one. You stick it on the stove and it starts percolating up into the basket. You know, it makes steam, and then you take it off and the steam's gone, right? And so life is just very quick. It's very fast. I've always used this for an example because I think that when we look at it this way, we understand. Methuselah. How old was Methuselah when he died? Wow. Do you think that now Methuselah died the year of the flood, so whether he died in the flood or not, we don't know. But let's say he didn't die in the flood. Say he died before the flood, just by way of example. Let's say he's laying on his bed, on his deathbed, and he's getting ready to die. Do you think he looked up and said, boy, I didn't think this day would ever get here? No, I think he probably said, wow, life is short. The man was almost 1,000 years old. So was Adam. We know Adam didn't die in the flood. Adam was almost as old as Methuselah. Life is short. And so he's making that point. Job's complaint, he made a strong complaint against God here in verses 11 through 19. A statement that he later regrets when he sees the big picture over in chapter 42. But the idea is Job states his inability to keep from speaking his lament. His lamentation is there and he just can't not speak it because his distress at the prospect of dying and going away from all his comforts and being committed to the grave. Of course, he's not in comfort now, but all of the comforts that he did have. And it's so painful that he can't but vent his feelings. Now, he's talking about emotional pain now. So, see, that's something we have to understand. Not only is Job physically shot, his physical body is just ruined. What about his emotional pain, his mental anguish? 1 out of 10 is 20 or 1,000. You know, it's maximum. Any more and he would die. And I've always maintained, again, that Satan took him right to the edge of death. In the very minute he got the least bit better, he took him right back to the edge again and held him there this whole time for months. And he asked this question to God, if he was some kind of an animal that needed to be under guard. If God felt he was so rambunctious that he couldn't be trusted, like maybe the sea monster. Am I like the sea monster? That you have to keep your thumb on me? Do I misbehave that much? And then he further complained when he thought he might go to bed to rest, God gave him these terrifying dreams. You know, I thought maybe I might go get just a little sleep, and then you gave me these terrifying dreams. So no doubt Satan was permitted to give him these terrible nightmares. You know, because after all, God said, okay, go ahead. Test him. You can't kill him, but test him. So he was allowed to test him in every aspect. Nightmares were one of those aspects. Have you ever had a nightmare that you woke up and while it was going on, it seemed so real, and you woke up and you thank God it was over? Oh, man, I've had nightmares that I thought it was real, and when I woke up, it took me a minute to realize that it was a nightmare. You know, so we have those from time to time, right? And you know, and thank God that those kind of nightmares are really, hopefully, few and far between, but they do exist. And so Job's friends erred by asserting that Job was suffering because of sinfulness, verses 20 and 21. But we know that Job, or rather, God affirmed that Job was the kind of man he wanted him to be, right? Chapters 1 and 2. However, being a man, he was subject to the weaknesses all people have, right? Was Job perfect? Was he sinlessly perfect? Had Job ever sinned in this life? Well, sure he had. And we're going to notice that he owns up to that. He said, I sinned in my youth, but I've lived righteously. Not that he hadn't even committed a sin as he grew older, because what did he do every morning when he woke up? Offered sacrifice. What's the purpose of a sacrifice? Forgiveness of sins. And so he recognized that, but again, he wasn't living in sin. He wasn't a sinner. He was a faithful follower of God who, on occasion, stepped out of line, but was still walking in the light. And at some point in the future, and he talks about this daysman that would at some point would be there for him, and he would die on the cross, and his blood would forgive all of Job's sins. So since, or if he had sinned, what should be done? He says God should take away his iniquity. If I've sinned, take my iniquity away. That's the kind of person in the way Job lived in righteousness. So Job says, if I've sinned, just take my iniquity away. Don't do this to me. So in addition, he asked God why he was set up as a target. Why are you targeting me? Job does speak rashly, though, doesn't he? Is he kind of speaking out of turn just a little bit here? Probably. But what do we have to keep in mind? Is Job a desperate man at this point? Does he understand exactly what's going on? He doesn't understand why the things are happening to him that are happening. He's maintaining pretty well, isn't he? He just doesn't understand. Any comments? Let's look at
verse 2 there. No, verse, yeah. He said, as a servant earnestly desires the shadow, as an hireling looking for the reward of his work. I think that maybe he's referring to his confidence in his salvation.
Well,
should he die, I mean, he's looking for that reward.
Well, in the context, really what he's talking about, he's making the point that it is natural for him to ask to die. In the same way, it's natural for the soldier to be looking forward to his getting out of the service and coming home. It's natural for him to ask to die. It's just as natural for him to want to die as it is for the servant to want to look for a shady spot during the workday. It's just as natural for him to want to die as it is for the person who is hired to want to look for his pay. That's within the context is really what he's talking about there. He's making that point that it's not wrong for me to ask to die, because after all, what happens to everyone in the end anyway? We all die. We all suffer hardships in this life, and we all end up dying. So it's natural, and it's just as natural as, and he gives these examples of things that it's natural for people to desire. And so that's kind of the point that he's making there. Hey, Jefferson.
Interesting to me that even gotten to chapter 7, but he has all these questions. Doesn't make any rash statements or anything, but he just asking all these questions, trying to figure out.
Sure. And I think that's the measure of the man, that he isn't turning his back on God. You know, he isn't blaming God. I mean, he is saying that he believes God is doing this because, not because God is a mean, vindictive God, but just his idea is God is a sovereign God. God can do what he pleases. He gave it to you, he can take it away. And he doesn't see anything wrong with that. So that's not where his lamentation is coming from. His lamentation is just simply, okay, God took all this away from me. Now I just don't understand why. And boy, am I suffering. I just want relief because I haven't sinned, and I just wish that for whatever reason he chose me as a target, I just wish that he would just take my life. And he isn't being inordinately rash toward God. He's a little rash. He's making some statements, but it's because he doesn't understand the big picture yet. He's not aware of what went on in heaven. He isn't aware of what Satan's doing to him. He doesn't know all that. And so, but he is asking questions. He just wants to know. I think that's normal. That's natural.
Are you even aware of Satan? Because the only time Satan's mentioned is in the Genesis story, and then we hear about the evil of the flood. And if he's between the flood and Abraham, there may be also some lack of knowledge regarding Satan, and that I'm just wondering, because other than the Genesis narrative, you don't really hear about Satan.
Yeah.
You hear the product of Adam and Eve's sin, but you don't really hear about Satan. So could we say that he's ignorant as to the power of Satan, possibly, and thinks that there's something he did to
Job speaks of the flood. Okay? So Job is very aware of evil and wickedness and sin. So I would say he's aware of the cause of sin. Okay? Now, we're going to have to get a little further into the text, and I'm going to have to be a little more refreshed on that aspect of it. And I'll look into that a little closer because I don't have a definite answer for that. As far as the person Satan, I can't say one way or the other right now. I'll have to look into that. That's an interesting question.
When we talk about Job being the oldest book, the first book, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's the first book that was written, not in chronological order.
No, well, see, I think it was the first book that was written. It doesn't hold the oldest information, Because obviously the creation account, that information is older than what information we have with Job, right?
But that's what I'm saying. The book of Job was written before the creation.
Sure.
Was written.
Yeah. I think the book of Job was written prior to, well, because Moses wrote the creation account.
When it says the first book, that people will think, well, that comes before all this other.
Yeah. No. The information in the Pentateuch is obviously older, but the book itself, Job, I think, was written prior to the Pentateuch because Moses was not as old as Job. But as far as being aware of the person Satan,
That's the part I'm wondering.
you know, I'll have to look into that a little deeper because I can't say right off the top of my, you know, again, we go back and we say, well, he's obviously aware of wickedness and sin and evil and the purpose of sacrifices. And something else that we have to be aware of. God communicated with Job. And so he was aware of things, and they had discussions prior to the end of the book that we don't know about. You know, God communicated with Abel. We don't have any of that information. You know, because he would have had to have communicated with him because we know he was that Abel was a married man, had a family because he's offering sacrifices during the patriarchal period of time. Only the head of the home did that, right? He wasn't in Adam's household any longer. So, you know, we don't always have the information, but that's a wonderful question that I'll have to go back and refresh myself on that because I'm not really sure, but that's a good question. Any other comments? All right, well, let's look into chapter 8 here. Let's move into Bildad. Bildad begins to talk, and Bildad begins to accuse Job in the first 7 verses here. Now, Bildad makes a harsh charge against Job. In his view, he believes Job is certainly a hypocrite by continually claiming his innocence. And he is convinced that Job suffers because of his sinful conduct. Now, when we make these points, we want to point out they are saying that Job is living in sin and he is a hypocrite. He's a hyper-hypocrite. He's not just a run-of-the-mill hypocrite. He is a huge hypocrite. He's been putting on this facade all these years, and now it's come crashing down on him. He demands to know, how long, Job, are you going to continue to proclaim innocence? How long are you going to keep doing this? And he calls them windy grievances, right? Windy grievances. You're full of hot air. And he reproves Job for justifying himself, and he says, you're like a strong wind. He asked if he thought God would pervert justice. You keep saying you're innocent. So you believe God would pervert justice, right? Is that what you're saying? And so it was a rhetorical question because he assumed Job was receiving just recompense. You know, we don't need to answer Job because we know you're getting what you deserve. You're getting a just punishment for sin. You don't even have to answer. It's a rhetorical question. Because God does not bless the wicked and assault the righteous. That is Bildad's whole point. And so, in other words, God would not have afflicted Job unless he had it coming. Right? That's his whole point. And since God does not pervert justice, he does not punish the innocent. Now, here's the ironic thing. What Bildad had to say about God's justice is 100% correct. He's right. But his application of the point to Job is absolutely misplaced. Right? God doesn't pervert justice. He doesn't punish the innocent. But none of that applies to Job. And so Bildad missed the point. The patriarch had bemoaned his suffering, but at no point, just like Faye was pointing out, at no point was he saying that God's perverting justice. So he never said that. And so, bringing up a sore point here is what Bildad insinuated. Verses 4 through 7. Job's children must have been guilty of sin, or they wouldn't have been killed. Bildad jumps on the wagon, right? He was assuming, because he had no knowledge of Job's children. He didn't know what they were, anything in which they were involved. He didn't have any knowledge of any sin on their part. And when we look in John 7 verse 24, we are to judge, but we're to use a righteous judgment. All people judge. We're commanded to judge. Now, in chapter 5, Jesus said of John, in John chapter 5, Jesus says probably one of the most quoted but misused verses in the whole of the Bible, judge not that you be not judged, right? People don't understand what that means. Well, they stop too quick. But we need to get over to chapter 7, verse 24. Judge with a righteous judgment. See, the thing is, someone doesn't like what another says when they talk about their ungodly lifestyle or whatever the case may be, and they bring up, judge not that you be not judged. Well, they're judging you, aren't they, when they say that? Aren't they judging you? That's a misplaced judgment, right? We have to judge according to someone's activities, their actions, right? So what that means is one's judgment cannot be harsh or hypocritical, right? Unnecessarily harsh. Never hypocritical. Matthew 7, 1 through 6. But by making unsubstantiated claims, Bildad only added misery and sorrow to an already intolerable situation. He's not helping his friend, he's making it worse. So it seems while Bildad nor Eliphaz or their compatriots could claim sinless perfection, they appear to be expecting absolute flawlessness from Job and his children. So if we could ever use the idiom kick someone while they're down, I think it applies probably in this situation, because that's what they're doing to the man Job. So Bildad urges Job to look back, verses 8 through 22. So what we have here is Bildad becomes a history major. You know, it's good to look into history. But if it was wrong then, it's wrong now. Right? Time doesn't change something from being wrong. So Bildad can do nothing but call Job a hypocrite. He can't bring evidence showing that Job is a sinner. And if Job would only repent, he would be restored and his enemies would be put to shame. Bildad and the others ought to be careful, or I guess we need to use the past tense, should have been careful about what they wished for, because they didn't have the evidence to throw any of this up to Job. Any comments, questions?
These friends were only business acquaintances. They really didn't know that much about his family life.
Well, you know, it appears that they were some of his oldest friends. He knew them probably longer than most, but I don't understand what happened here. You know, it's a difficult situation to really pick apart.
What I'm basing it on is the way that they're picking on his children.
Well,
they didn't know if he offered sacrifice.
Well, I don't know that would matter to them. You know, you've seen people who are supposed to be friends Maybe it's happened to, I mean, it's probably happened to all of us. Someone maybe supposed to be your friend and you really thought they were your friend, and then maybe it turns out maybe not so much. And this is a good example of that. And it doesn't take much for a person to turn on their friend, you know. And I mean, the character of these men obviously is not the character of Job. So, that. Huh?
Their outlook is diametrically.
Oh yeah, absolutely nowhere near where Job is. Yes.
Is it possible that these three friends lived far from Job?
Yes.
Because in chapter 2, it's talking about them coming from his own place, and it talks about their name and their distinction.
Yeah, they lived a good distance from him.
So could it be like when you have someone from high school reunion see you after a while and they don't know anything about you?
Yeah, that very well could be it. They definitely lived a good distance from Job. Yeah, and I wish that we had more time instead of being in the short term to talk about the places from where they came, because we can locate some of the places from where they came, and it was a good distance away from where Job would have been. So yeah, they're not. I think they probably had known each other for years, but they weren't next door neighbors. It wasn't like they were close, and they shared their daily lives with one another, and particularly at this time. I mean, if you didn't live in very close proximity, your communication was very lacking. It wasn't something that was going to you were going to be able to communicate with someone. It wasn't going to be a ready communication.
What I'm getting at, I've lived several different places. I've made good friends everywhere I've lived.
Sure.
Still keep contact with some of them. But it's just through a business association.
Yeah.
They don't know nothing about that. I don't know anything about it.
Yeah.
Just our place that developed that friendship. It's similar to something like that.
Well, I've made close friends all the way halfway around the world. And we do know some things about each other's families. But man, they live halfway around the world. I mean, I know how many children they've got. I kind of, in general, know what line of work they're in. But as far as, we don't live close enough to each other. And I mean, I get an email every Christmas and every New Year's and, stuff like that. They didn't have that. They didn't have, you can, correspond just like that. They had to travel. And if they sent a letter, that letter had to travel with somebody. We're talking weeks. Yeah. Wasn't snail mail, it was slower. So yeah, it wasn't like this was a best of friend kind of thing. Now they were obviously friendly, or they wouldn't have come. Word had got back to them. They had a relationship, and it was more than just an acquaintance, but it wasn't, they, like I say, they weren't next door neighbors. I'm not going to travel. These people I know that live in India and Indonesia, in Malaysia, something happens, I'm not getting on the airplane and going over there. I love them. I pray for them, but they're not getting on the airplane coming over here either. We're not that close. That's expensive, right? So they had a relationship where they were going to climb on the animal, whatever they rode, and they went, So they did have a relationship. Good comments. Anything else?
I think Abraham, until his son was 40, before he found out that his brother had more children, and then Rebecca.
Job replies, he talks about the greatness of God, verses 1 through 10. So in response to Bildad, Job shows his desire to plead his cause before God. He admits God is just and humanity is sinful. He owns up to that. And in those cases where punishment is meted out, he says God did it justly. Now, if God were to bring charges against a person in a tribunal setting, Job says the person couldn't answer 1 in 1,000. He said a person can't stand before God. That person would be found guilty on all charges. That's the point he's making. Because one argument or excuse out of 1,000 would stand up against God's justice. That's how perfect God is. He's infinitely wise. He's unlimited in strength. No one can successfully oppose him. Anyone who sets himself in opposition to God will fail in his efforts and he will be destroyed. And so Job is making the point that it is against the best interest of anyone to oppose God, and it is in the best interest of any person to be in submission to God. So Job is making the point here, why would I oppose God? Why would I go out of my way to be sinful and to live in a sinful lifestyle against God? I'm not going to do it. No matter what you say or what you're accusing me of doing. God is able to have power and authority over nature. He's making that point. He can move mountains. He has power over the celestial bodies, the sun, the moon, the stars. He has power over all of that. And we can bring up things that God has done. Joshua 10, when Joshua went to battle with against the 5 kings of the Amorites, and God caused the sun to stand still. So we know He can have power over the physical realm, the long day. You remember when Hezekiah asked Him for a sign, and He caused the sundial to move backwards? 2 Kings 20. Here's the thing. Brother Kate used to tell us all the time, look, if you're looking at the sundial and you see it move backwards, it's over. It's over. Right? Give it up. It's over. So he talks about Him having formed the great constellations of the sky. Space is an unfathomable thing for the human mind, isn't it? It's almost unthinkable to look out into space and say, that just doesn't end. It just does not end. And, the earth is 8,000 miles in diameter. The sun is 864,000 miles in diameter. A star there's a star near Orion, and they have found that star to be 215 million miles in diameter. That's how huge that star is. A star mentioned by Job here, Arcturus, is said to be 25,600 times greater in volume than our sun. And Antares, he mentions it. It is said to have a diameter of 400 million miles. Our galaxy is 100,000 light years in width. There are 1 billion galaxies more in addition to our own galaxy. Now think about that. Can you imagine? Our largest telescopes can see about 1.5 billion light years into space. Isn't that amazing? That's the distance they can see out into space, our largest telescopes. Beyond that, stars begin to appear as just great clouds of light. Job says God is incomprehensible. Job nailed it, didn't he? Verses 11 through 24. He continued to exalt God, and he explained his nature. He understood God is a spirit. We can't see spirits. They're invisible to the human eye. And there is nothing material or physical about God, contrary to what the Mormon religion teaches. Spirits are invisible. There is a part of the human that is eternal. That's our spirit. That part goes back to God when the body dies. The separation, James said, of the body and spirit is what death is, right? When we die, the body and the spirit separate. Not only is God invisible, He can't be stopped from His course of action. No opposition to God is effective. Those who contribute to the support of pride against God, those people will sink under His wrath, Job says. He just goes on to continue through verse 21 talking about the greatness of God. If it were a matter of law, he says he could appear before God as a judge and he would be willing to enter into such a trial. But, again, he saw this not as a matter of law, but as a matter of God being a sovereign being. God does what He wants to do, and if He wants to do it, it's a righteous thing. So it isn't that Job's holding some kind of a ill will toward God about this. That's amazing, isn't it, that Job has that attitude toward God. God is God. He's righteous. He's a sovereign. If He wants to take it away, He has every right to take it away. So Job isn't angry with God. He has a right to do what he wants. And he doesn't have to give an account to anyone about it. He just wanted to stand before God and make an appeal and understand why. He just was asking questions. And it's okay to ask questions. God wants us to question when we don't understand. He just wants us to be respectful. That's the thing about God. Any comments or questions? All right. Well, our time is up. So we didn't hardly make it through chapter 9. We'd have just a little bit of chapter 9, so I guess we'll have to finish that up next time. Let me mark my page here so I won't forget it this time. All right, any questions before we end? All right, we'll have to double down. Now, I won't be here the next 2 classes, so I'll have someone coming in. Brother Ron Gilbert will be here next time. And then I'm hoping that Brother Jim will be able to come time after that. I think he will be able to. Then I'll be back. And now, whatever you do, when these other brethren show up, you tell them what a great class this has been and how wonderful and that you miss me so bad.